this.
Oh, I don't have. Okay. Well, let's get to our main event because that's the exciting thing. So today we have invited Karen Holmberg, the Associate Professor of Literature and Creative Writing at the School of Writing, Literature, and Film at Oregon State University. And today she's going to review Shelby Van Pelt's novel, Remarkably Bright Creatures. I don't know if you know much about Karen. I'm going to tell you just a little bit. She's an award-winning poet, essayist, and fiction writer whose work strives to honor the natural world. Her second collection of poems, Axis Mundi, was named one of the top 10 poetry titles for 2013 by Slate Magazine. And she has a new young adult novel coming out in April 2024 called The Collagist. Is that right? Yeah, The Collagist, and it's forthcoming from Fitzroy Books. She lives here in Corvallis, where she teaches literature, writing, and letterpress printing at Oregon State University as part of the MFA program in creative writing. And then just a personal aside, I think I first met Karen in maybe 2013 or 2014. She led a writing workshop for William Stafford's Centennial in 2014 here at the library. And one of the lucky things about my job is that when I do events, I often get to participate in them or listen to them, which is really cool. So I got to take your along with you. Yeah. And it was awesome. I still have the I wrote as part of that workshop. Maybe the best poem I've ever written. I don't know who writes a lot of poetry. And what was really impressive, Karen is such a calm, non-judgmental, kind presence. And great presence. And you really led us through an amazing workshop. One of our supervisors attended it as well. And we were like so impressed with our poems when we went out. So I think that you're really going to enjoy Karen. She's a great presence. Like I said, she's a great writer, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this book. So welcome, Karen. I'll let you take it away.
I don't know if this is working. I don't know how to get it close enough. I don't know. Can you hear me? I think it just needs to, the volume has to go up. It's not quite capturing. Oh, is that better? Can you hear me in the back? Awesome. Guess what day it is today?
Valentine's.
Yes, it is. And therefore, I have subtitled my presentation, A Love Story. Because I do think that there are so many people seeking love, afraid of love, protecting themselves from love, craving love, yearning. There is it's such an important element to the story, I think. But I also wanted to say I love my library. And I did a writing exercise. I did a Valentine's Day letterpress activity with my students the other day. And I kept trying to draw them in and say, make a letterpress Valentine's Day card. And they're like, who do I have to give a Valentine's Day card to? Thinking of a significant other. And I'm like, no, there are so many kinds of love in this world. There's so many varieties and species of love in this world that we really oversimplify love when we think about it as just for even human beings, right? Or just that significant other. And I think that's one of the great lessons of this book, is that it is about the interspecies love and regard that Tova develops for this octopus that in the end saves her. So right as I was preparing my PowerPoint, I saw this ad. Hatfield does not have an octopus in its Octocam. But after reading this book, I felt a twinge. I'm like, no, it should not be kept in captivity. Right? So I don't know if others of you had that response reading it too. And like when we read a work of fiction about an animal like this and suddenly we enter its world, we see how complex and impressive its inner life could be, right? And it's really difficult to look at the animal the same way anymore. But then, so I reached out to Hatfield and they don't keep them for more than a few months or so. So I felt better about that. Because I was about to protest. I'm like, okay, I'm going to free the octopus, because I was like, that's how reading changes us, right? I tried to embed a video here, but it wouldn't let me. So I'm going to go to my own, I thought it would be good to bask in a little octopus for a while. This is from Hatfield Science Center, and this is a handler. And what I was struck by in this little clip was the similarity to the story. I don't know if you can see it, but they're holding hands. see if I can get my. See that?
Largest. And a full frame on to this and weigh up to 110 gallons with an arm length of 8.
Oops.
She's excited. She will interact and be fed today, feeding her shrimp, which is something she did in her natural environment.
Look, she's trying to escape. She's pulling a Marcellus.
All these are Zerados. They have 8 R's, all lined with suckers. And they use those suckers to grab and build its taste.
So she's tasting this handler right now. That's amazing.
Now she's grabbing the food with her suckers, and eventually she would pull it into the center of those arms. That's where her mouth is. It's the only hind part of her body that looks very similar to a small carrot seed. You can see that little fish shape hanging down below.
Okay, well, that's all I have here for you, but I did just want to give you a tiny taste of the octopusness that fills this book, because the this octopus Marcellus is indeed the main character, if not. Oops. I have a special prowess in the technical difficulty department, so I'm gonna actually. That's my superpower, is to have technical issues. So I'm going to completely get out of that so it doesn't haunt us. Marcellus arguably is the most important character here. As a protagonist, Marcellus is the one with the most knowledge, the one that moves the plot forward. So it's quite impressive. It's beyond what he's not just an incidental factor in this book. I wanted to share some of the author's own words about this book. So I did go scrounging around, looking at reviews, I looked at video reviews, I looked at written reviews and published reviews. And in the author's own words, this is what she said about the process of writing and then proposing to publish this book. After I signed with my agent, she shared with me a bit of their process. So this is just to get an agent. An agent, in case you don't know, is the person who represents you as they try to sell your book to a publisher. She shared with me a bit about their process, and she told me that her associate, Maria, who takes a first pass at submissions, had written on the margin of my query letter, "This is either bananas or brilliant." I mean, it was bananas. But Kristen took a chance to read this banana submission and agreed to work with me. This is from an interview at the Los Angeles Public Library blog. So I just thought I would start by throwing a question out to you, chumming the water, so to speak. Hope you're hungry. What's bananas or unusual about this novel? As you compare this to other novels you've read, were you struck by any differences or unusual qualities about it, aside from maybe the fact that an animal speaks? Is there anything else that strikes you as unusual about this novel?
Introduction to every section.
It's formally very interesting, right? With this kind of, do you notice that Marcellus kind of disappears in the latter part of the book? There was like a 75-page area where Marcellus is not featured that often. But in the beginning, you can just look at the spine, and you can see the dark edges of those shadowy pages where we know that there is going to be almost an MC telling us what's about to be revealed. So it has an interesting structure. What else seemed unusual? Yeah. Yes. Right. Yes, it is a sad story in some respects, because we have this animal that has a very short lifespan, the entirety of it pretty much kept in captivity. We also find out a lot about the octopus just by reading this book. So it almost serves as a kind of field guide to the giant Pacific octopus. What else? Any other things? Yeah.
Pacific favorite.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's it all. Or exactly over the clerk.
So, okay, anyone else? I'm sorry if those of you who haven't read the book don't have anything to say here, but there are other things you can participate in. Other thoughts?
There are several storylines.
Yes.
How it comes together.
How are they going to come together? Yes, it's like a mystery.
Or so it says, you know, when will they figure it out?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of one thing. When
Yes, it's interesting and unusual in the sense that Marcellus knows everything already. And so he's like, boy, you dummies, you don't see it. You don't see it. So there's this weird mystery in which it's not mysterious to Marcellus, but to everybody else, we don't understand, right? We don't understand it. I think it's also quite wonderful in that it shows such a wide age range, right? From kids and teenagers and young adults to middle-aged people to elderly people. I also think it's really remarkable because there's no real violence in this book. And I mean, I'm used to, this is something I'm very sensitive to because I feel like I could read this book to my children and there's nothing in it that wouldn't just kind of enrich them. And I think that's really pretty rare in the adult novel book. So I think in terms of what's bananas about it, like it does seem to me weird in the sense that it became a New York Times bestseller, right? Because it's the best possible worlds, in my opinion, in that it has such a broad appeal.
sex, violence.
Very little sex. If there's any sex at all, it's just alluded to. No violence, peril, killing, murders. There is sadness, there is intense emotion, but there is no harshness. People are generally kind to each other in this book. They're not perfect, but they're kind to each other. I thought I would introduce from my extensive researches what Van Pelt wanted to be asked, but never was asked by a reviewer. As I was reading these reviews, I'm like, enough already about where Tova came from as a character. Yes, she's modeled on your grandmother. You must be so tired of answering that question. And I was like, what questions? Like I was thinking about what questions would I ask Shelby if I had the opportunity, but she was surprised she'd ever been asked why Marcellus doesn't just leave the aquarium and escape. And especially since there are real life examples of octopus who have gone down drains and escaped. The famous Inky from New Zealand, for instance. And the answer, of course, she says, this is from Shelby Van Pelt, is that Marcellus is afraid of change, just like the rest of the characters in the book. I thought that was very thought-provoking. And it sort of molded my discussion of the book today. So the octopus's narrator, that is definitely one of the most unusual things about this book when you consider that it is for an adult audience, but not at all unusual if you consider the genre of children's literature. There are many novels beloved by all age groups where there are animal narrators. Can you think of some off the top of your head Charlotte's Web. I love Charlotte's Web. Yeah, there are lots of books for children where there is a speaking animal, but not so many for adults. But actually, Shelby Van Pelt reports that her favorite sections to write were the octopus sections. She says, I sometimes joke I must have been a cranky old man in a prior life because his voice came very naturally to me. Being in character was the easy part. Much harder was figuring out where to draw the line with respect to the fantastical elements. At one point in a draft, I had the octopus operating a photocopier. And one of my critique partners was just like, nope, too far.
That's definite.
Right. So I'm going to read a little passage, the passage that's up here on the screen, and we'll think together about the qualities of this voice. Day 1307 of my captivity. Humans have few redeeming qualities, but their fingerprints are miniature works of art. I am well read in fingerprints. I suppose you could say it is it is one fortunate side effect of dealing with humans all day long. Their trembling boogers and damp armpits. Their sticky palms reeking of floral lotion and popsicle residue. But when the doors lock for the night and the lights dim, they leave behind a stunning, intricate mural on the glass at the front of my tank. Sometimes I spend quite some time staring at them, studying little oval masterpieces. I visually trace the grooves from the outside to the center, then back out to the edge again, each one unique. I remember all of them. Fingerprints are like keys with their specific shape. I remember all keys, too. So I was just wondering what qualities you notice here. Is there anything about the word choice, the rhythm or sound or philosophy that seems to translate octopus to you? Those of you who've read the book or just judging from this passage, what kind of a sensibility do you think Van Pelt is trying to develop here? Yeah.
Very multitask, very organized,
Orderly, yes.
tell long,
Mm-hmm.
but he also does this for the more aesthetic sense. But
I love that. He loves beauty. He appreciates beauty. Wow. But it's not just beauty, it's also that complexity, right? So those are two excellent points. Intricacy. He actually thinks that humans are kind of dumb and that they don't really see the intricacies, right? Until the end, when they're like, you have to literally hit them over the head in order for humans to see, make connections. And so we see this animal emerging, that sort of a genius at making connections, right? Yeah. Sure. Yes. I'm assuming so. I mean, I know Shelby Van Pelt had consulted her marine science colleagues and friends to make sure that there was nothing too implausible here. But that's a great question. Like, how does she, well, he has several keys. Like, he also finds Tova's key that she's lost off her keychain and returns it to her. So there are several emblems that are really important in this book. One is the key. Another is the fingerprint. These are all things that are solutions to problems or markers of identity, right? So he keeps mentioning things like that. So, he has a soft side. He's like, yes, humans are disgusting, but they're also marvelous. So when you start thinking about this title, you realize that the remarkably bright creatures, it's referencing not only the octopus, but from the octopus perspective, humans have a brightness about them, right? They're remarkable. They can be kind of dumb and need a lot of coaching, right? But they're also quite remarkable. So I think that's a really wonderful, because those are all really wonderful observations. We're going to talk about similarities with Tova, because I really think that Marcellus and Tova hit it off for not accidentally. Right? It's not an accident that Tova loves this orderly, octopus, right? It got a lot of similar qualities. So let's think about that. Oops. I think I did something rather wrong. See, technology is I'm back. Okay. We'll think about Tova's similarities, but first I want you, this is when you're going to think through or actually write through a little bit of an exercise. Like let's pause here on what it took for Shelby Van Pelt to create an animal voice. Let's think about that. She said it came easily to her, but I'm wondering what you would have to do, right, to be able to kind of internalize and feel like you had an accurate voice. So I'm going to have you listen to your inner animal here. You don't have to write it down. You can or if you want to write it down, you could do it in bullet points, or you could literally go for it and write a monologue in the voice. But listen to your inner animal. This may be easier with a pet. Some animal that you might already have a voice for. Maybe you have an annoying cat, very supercilious, annoying cat. Or maybe you have a goofball, not very bright dog, and you sometimes imagine he's talking to you. Or maybe you're a researcher and you have a lot of knowledge about beavers or about whatever that is. I think it's some sort of gecko. It's a gecko. So I've given you some options. You can choose one of these, or you can think of your own inner animal, right? And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to just noodle around with this and try to come up with at least a few statements. Don't have to actually write it down. You can just think about it. Just try to see the world through this animal's eyes. And we're going to use the favorite Marcellus theme of the flaws of humanity. Okay? So just for a few minutes, and please do feel free to write. Think about flaws of humanity from the perspective of a beaver, for instance, or from the perspective of your cat. I don't have any paper. I want to do it too. All right, take a minute to just finish your meditations. I tried to write in the voice of a beaver because I got a chance to watch beavers. I was at Shot Pouch, which is part of the Spring Creek Project at a residency. And there was a river, there's a creek there, the Shot Pouch Creek, and the beavers were building on it. So 2 years ago I saw this, and I still haven't written about it. But I'm always pre-writing about it by trying to think about the incredible peace of industrious beavers and how relaxing it is to watch them, and then what they might think of us, the great destroyers, and how we often think of them as great destroyers, destroying our rivers. And so anyway, I went on a bit of a rant in my writing exercise, but what were the challenges of this for you? Does anyone want to share? Was it challenging? Yeah. Yeah, what does that make you? Does that make you afraid of something? It's like, how is it challenging? I'm a big fan personally, because I think there's so much more connects us with the animal world than divides us. That. Do you want to elaborate on that, bro? It's hard. Okay, it may be hard to really be able to perceive what an animal might be thinking or feeling. It feels a little audacious, doesn't it? Like, what right do I have? What do I know, right? Other thoughts? Yes. Yes.
I
So this sounds like this was kind of easier for you to speak as Emily. Oh. Well, she has something in common with Marcellus then. Yeah. Other thoughts? If you try to do this, do you think, and you really committed to it, do you think it might change the way you saw the creature you were speaking for? Like, there's we're talking a little bit about the narcissism of us being able to, assuming that we can understand what it's like to be an animal, and that maybe even the impossibility of it, but the attempt to might be valuable, right? So, sometimes we have to be careful about being too judgmental about the things we decide to write about, because we need to maybe focus on the process more than the product. But I think we learn a lot when we try to take on the perspective, especially when that is through empathy and not through pride or having some predetermined message that you want to push with your portrait or your voice of the animal. And I think that Shelby doesn't. have an agenda in this respect. We're going to talk a little bit about the octopus as a mirror. And what I found really fascinating about the octopus is that the Marcellus, everyone who has contact with Marcellus learns something about themselves, right? Here is a scene in which Tova, for the first time, takes a really good look in Marcellus's eye. She leans over until her nose nearly touches the water, her own eyes now inches from his otherworldly pupil so dark blue it's almost black, an iridescent marble. They study each other for what seems an eternity. I was, again, I mentioned narcissism lately. I do think there's an echo of Narcissus, the myth of Narcissus, that, this kind of, in the Greek myth, Narcissus doesn't recognize that his reflection is himself, but thinks it's another. But here you see Tova and the octopus having some sort of gaze lock, not mind meld. We don't have enough detail, but this locking gaze. And it's interesting to think about the fact that Tova, in other scenes, is also described as having a sort of intimidating stare. So, I mean, there's definitely, when I saw this scene, I'm like, oh, there's something definitely going on. But Van Pelt is actually in interviews very, very clear that the octopus, although she enjoyed writing the character, is actually a foil for the human characters in some respects. She said in an interview in Seattle Times, it started out being a story about an octopus, but really it's a story about humans. The octopus gives us this lens with which we can look at ourselves with a bit more distance and a bit more clarity. So this lens, this mirror, this like reflective surface that allows us to reflect on our own humanity is something that I noticed happening or being referred to again and again. And in fact, Physics Times, the esteemed source on the internet, my exobrain, right, says that octopus have reflective skin cells called adaptive iridocytes that allow the animal to adjust the wavelengths of light the cells reflect. So they can camouflage, they can mirror a color, so they can like see something and mirror its color. They can lighten and darken, they can change the color of their skin at will. So they are sort of mirror-like in just biologically. But let's look at some of Tova and Marcellus's shared traits. Weirdly, Tova is a very self-possessed person, right? She's very independent. She's a little stiff, a little formal. She blushes a lot. I don't know if you noticed this, but I counted like 14 different blushing episodes, which suggests to me that she's got a facade. She's got this exterior that's carefully controlled. She blushes, for instance, when she goes to Ethan's the grocery store and to get a pen to sign the paperwork to move into the assisted living facility, and Ethan asks her out for coffee, and she feels herself flush. Like, so when she gets emotionally activated, she like Marcellus, she blushes. They are both particular. Marcellus, he fancies sea cucumbers. He has to really discipline himself not to eat too many of them, because they keep noticing that the sea cucumbers, his choice delicacy, tend to diminish in number in the tank. Tova is very particular. She will only go to one hair salon because she only trusts her hair to this one person who's been cutting it for like 30 years. Does anyone relate? Yeah, right. So she's extremely particular. They're standoffish. They're not the kind of people that want to open up immediately. In fact, Tova and Marcellus have this relationship that actually begins because she rescues him, right, from the consequences, from the bad situation caused by him escaping from his tank. They firmly defend their standards and capacities. So Tova, for instance, has little patience for flabby language. Of course, Marcellus is, very sure that humans in some ways are vastly inferior to cephalopods. They're aging, and they're acutely aware of the consequences of aging, right? So Tova is making decisions based on the fact that she has no one to care for her and doesn't want to be a burden. And Marcellus is counting down the remainder of his life. As he counts his days of captivity, he's very aware that he has very few days to remain alive. Both live profoundly alone. Here it's worth noting that Shelby Van Pelt started this novel during the pandemic. In fact, she couldn't even go in person to an aquarium to watch the octopus because they were closed down because of the pandemic. She did most of her research through YouTube and watching videos. So, we were all in our little Zoom tanks, right? And in that period, right? And I feel like this isolation, this aloneness becomes a really important theme in this book. Both have night jobs. Marcellus is he has a nocturnal, he has 2 night jobs. One is pilfering food from the other tanks that he finds better than his mackerel that he's force fed. And the other is finding lost objects, right? And hoarding them up. He's sort of a collector. And then Tova, of course, is the night cleaner at the aquarium. Both have accidents, like Marcellus gets tangled up in some electrical cords. Tova falls off the step stool and has to wear a cast, right? So they're sort of accident prone. They both realize after these accidents that they are vulnerable, right? So there's just there are a lot of parallels here. And I think that you could take this quote here, that Shelby Van Pelt gave about Marcellus at the National Book Festival, and you could replace the name with Tova, and it would be equally true. He, Marcellus, is very condescending, but he also holds human to a higher standard than that to which they hold themselves. He wants humans to be better. I think Tova would totally agree with that. Tova would be like, one of her favorite things is, good heavens, right? This indignant, good heavens, that's ridiculous, right? She wants people to behave better. She lectures Cameron when he tries to take off from his job and says, you're better than that. You owe your boss more than that, right? You're better than that. So just another similarity. The more I thought about these character parallels, the more I became aware that there's a really skillful way in which Van Pelt is dispersing her themes through her characterizations. With a big jet of octopus ink. Like there's this big cloud of themes that just kind of touch everyone, and all these themes are very connected and interdependent. So the main themes I saw in this book were isolation, estrangement, independence, secrecy, and fears of intimacy. I mean, there are so many. There was probably 8. I know octopuses have 8 legs, but I just thought these were the most important ones. But anyway, none of these are solitary. Like secrecy and isolation are connected. If you have secrets, you will be isolated, right, from other people because you've closed off some information. If you have fears of intimacy, you may choose to be very independent so that you don't have to risk anything, so you don't have to be vulnerable. If you are very isolated, you may cast that as that's just my independence. I'm just really independent, right? To protect yourself. If you are estranged from other people, it may be because you have a secret or you're such a secretive person that you can't open up, right? So Tova gets estranged from her brother for reasons she doesn't really understand, but she can't make herself make the first move. That estrangement, maybe she's even keeping it as a secret from herself, why her brother, she cannot seem to bridge this 20-year kind of absence of lack of contact. And then if you consider, this idea going back to what Shelby said about Marcellus being afraid to escape. He's afraid of change. A lot of these characters are very afraid of change. And they are afraid of loving because love is painful often. So we have Tova who lost her son, doesn't know how, doesn't know why, and that has really put a scar in her heart or an unhealed wound. And then her husband Will dies, and she's determined to live alone. She's determined not to get into another relationship to protect herself. And also, perhaps because that would open her up, that would make she would have to be open to changing. It takes a lot to accommodate another person in your life, as we all know, right? So I was going to take a look at some of these themes in a little bit more detail. And the first is the theme of secrecy. So Marcellus knows a secret, and he's good at keeping secrets. So in a sense, you see Marcellus as being the main secret keeper. Of course, he says very snarkily, well, I can't help keeping secrets because I'm stuck in this tank. Who would I tell, right? Like, I'm stuck here. It's sort of part of his life is that he is the keeper of secrets. Tova is secretive. She never talks about the past or Eric. She doesn't share her plans for moving to the assisted living community with her pals, the nitwits, until the last possible minute. When Marcellus is wandering, causes her to show up with spots on her arm where his suckers gripped her. They think she's got some terrible rash, right? Because she actually asks herself, should I tell them? So she keeps his nocturnal wanderings a secret. And then Tova asks Cameron at the very end about whether they should keep a secret. And so this is on page 177. I'll just read this little tiny spimp. So, Marcellus is still getting out because actually Tova has thrown away the materials that Terry got to lock his crate, his enclosure. And look how Marcellus she is in the scene. When you went up there to save him, you weren't afraid of him at all, says Cameron. Tova clicks her tongue. Certainly not. He's gentle. Well, it was still pretty badass. I appreciate you saying so. She looks at the ground briefly, then back up at him with her eyes, which are a shrewd shade of greenish gray. So, shall it be our secret? Right? So she's a secret keeper for sure. Marcellus has a trove of secret treasures in his cave. And so does Tova. She's got this whole attic that is full of everything from her mother's embroidered pillowcases to Eric's toys. She's got this trove of treasures. Another thing that occurred to me is that Cameron, called Cammy, is very close to camo or camouflage, right? So he's camouflaged to Tova. She works with him, but she doesn't see him. She doesn't see their resemblance. And again, this is from Marcellus on page 232. He wonders, he has a whole monologue that keeps saying, how do they not see it? How do they not see it? Their relationship is camouflaged to them. And then Cameron's father's identity is the secret that his mother keeps. No one knows who Cameron's father is. She doesn't tell anybody. And then she disappears. The theme of isolation, again, is also very powerful here and also related in some ways to secrecy. So, again, it was written during the lockdown. It's not surprising. And anyone else who's, there are a lot of works that are being published now that were written in lockdown that have this theme of isolation. Sometimes this isolation that the characters are under is self-imposed, and sometimes it's out of the character's control. So Tova has self-imposed isolation. Marcellus has an isolation that's outside of his control. But Tova's estrangement from her brother, her widowhood, and her determination not to give in to the advances of Ethan, the gregarious, outgoing grocer, or enter in any other relationship. Her determination not to be a bother and a burden all isolate her. And then if you look at Marcellus, in the aquarium, he's the only creature represented as living completely on his own. Everyone else has at least a few other members of their species to keep them company, but Marcellus lives alone, as Tova is the only one of her friends to live alone. Everybody else has moved in or is planning to move in with children or has a partner. I think also Marcellus is her closest confidant. So there's this long passage on page 107 to 110 when she tells Marcellus the story of her son's disappearance. And I think it's because this is easier for her. It is less risky for her to confide it to a creature, to an animal, right, than to another human being, because she's always deflecting people's interest and questions. But she outright on page 108 says he died when he was 18 here, actually, well, out there, meaning out in the ocean, and then tells the story about how they think he might have done it to himself, no other explanation. It's always been so peculiar, though, because Eric was happy. Well, he was 18, so who knows what was going on in his brain. And yes, we had that argument. Oh, it was silly. He and his friends were kicking a soccer ball in the house, and they knocked over one of my Dala horses, my favorite one. It was old, brittle. My mother brought it over from Sweden. Its leg broke off. So what is her deepest secret? Her deepest secret is that she's afraid she may have driven him to this desperate measure by being angry with him. She may have pushed him away, isolating herself from him, and could have maybe prevented his death, you know, if she had not been so harsh about that. That's a huge pain to carry as a parent. I mean, I think all of us can understand how difficult that would be to admit that you feel like you may have been responsible or partially responsible. And she tells Marcellus, not any other human being. Spaces are very significant here as emblems of isolation. So the aquariums are powerful images of isolation. Tova's house is isolated up on a hill with lots of windows looking out over the bay. Cameron lives in an RV. You can't get a little bit, that's like a human aquarium, right? It's like the tiny little living space. And then in terms of isolation, Cameron is very isolated. He self-isolates because he's so afraid, he's so convinced he's kind of a good for nothing that every time he does something silly, he runs, right? He distances himself, but also he's fatherless, and he's, you know, he frames his search for his father as an attempt to get cash, because I think it's scarier to admit that he needs family, he needs a mother, he needs a father, he needs connections, right? So the other side of this theme of isolation seems to be the fear of intimacy. Speaking of which, intimacy, when Marcellus touches Tova, that is like the only person, or well, I say person, but the only living being that we really see touching her in the first part of the book at all until the very end. There is not much physical contact between her and every other entity in her life, and it actually marks her. It leaves these like these sucker scars that are shiny, and they, you know, she doesn't talk about it hurting, but it has physically marked her. Van Pelt was talking about how this might, you know, this theme of intimacy may be important to her because it was what she feels we were missing during the pandemic, was intimacy and play, right? Tova is prickly, very standoffish, but there's a well of tenderness and love and sorrow in her for Eric. And her need for him shows, for instance, in the way she cares for non-human objects, like the sea lion sculpture, which was important to him as a child. She carefully dusts and cleans under even the parts that aren't visible. And that also plays an important role in her, learning the truth, right? She has a strange intimacy with Cat too. Cat, the stray cat that she refuses to name, but that wanders into her life. She feels easier to be closer to these kind of non-judgmental, non-human animals. She's very afraid to get close to Ethan and keeps framing every like coffee date or dinner as it's not a date, it's not a date, it's not a date. Eric's death feels like a secret. It feels like something that she's kept out of or away from, a form of isolation. as if someone out there knows the truth but has withheld the information. And there's a point at which she discovers new information, which was that he had a girlfriend. Such a fundamental fact in your child's life, right? And there's this refrain she keeps repeating after she learns this over the span of several chapters. There was a girl, there was a girl, there was a girl. So she's got this new information that is cropping up about her son's intimacy with another human being that wasn't her. It's pretty complicated, right? Intimacy, isolation, estrangement, and secrecy are really intimately linked in this book. How do they resolve? Well, I would argue that the first step in Tova becoming open is to practice it, like to have a test drive on Marcellus, right? And also maybe to decide to make some big changes in her life and shake things up a little bit. She decides to sell her house and move into the assisted living, even though she decides that living in the assisted living is a mistake. Nonetheless, it's shaking things up, right? She stops being maybe so afraid of change. She starts to be maybe willing to take a few changes, make a few changes in her life. So risking connections and attachments, making big changes. There's also active grieving. She has not grieved, right? So we see on, I guess it's 331 or so. Let's see where it is. We see the scene where she actually goes out to the pier with Marcellus in a mop bucket because he's escaped again. And before that, the truth breaks over her of all the grief that she stored up all of her life. And the text reads, this is on page 331. Tova crumples to the ground again, this time propping her elbows on the rim of the bucket. Once the hot, fast tears start spilling, she's powerless to stop them. Droplets pelt the surface as her thin shoulders heave, falling faster with each monstrous sob. No one is here. No one is looking. Throwing caution away, she allows the grief to course through her. Finally, the tears slow to a trickle, punctuated by hiccups. Her eyeballs feel hot and dry. So she stays there in grief and, allows Marcellus to see her grief, which maybe is enough, right? It's enough to release that. And then later on in that scene, she says, "What am I going to do without you?" to Marcellus. Then she says, "What am I going to do without you?" she says, dodging a hiccup, and he blinks his kaleidoscopic eye, which is now more roomy than ever. He might only have weeks or days left, Terry said. She sits up, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. For that matter, what am I going to do with you? Right? So she risks that attachment with him, but also she has future promise of attachments because of what's been revealed to her by Marcellus. She no longer feels alone. She feels connected by blood to new people, and there's a path forward for her. And also that the terrible secret of a lot of these terrible secrets have been opened that she's been keeping from herself. The mystery of Eric's death and so forth. And then also, there are these little clues. And I think it's so ingenious that Eric's high school ring turns up at the very end in Cameron's possession, and inside's engraved eels. And Cameron can't make any sense out of this. But Tova knows exactly what eels means, right? What those initials stand for. Eric, right? So she has this revelatory moment. Again, Marcellus is like, finally, right? Finally you get it, right? But the book ends another thing that's really wonderful about this book is it ends in joy. It ends in love. It ends in satisfaction, in the potential for healing. So, anything else you'd like to talk about? Yes, this is the limits of my PowerPoint skills. You're seeing it right here.
So the cover.
So we have a few more minutes. Is any last things you want to bring up on this happy Valentine's Day? And I see a number of you are wearing red. That's really good. I'm wearing red. I don't usually dress up for holidays because I'm sort of a Tova. For all that Bonnie complimented me, I am a little bit. I sort of relate. Does anyone else relate to Tova? Yeah. Mirrors. Other questions or observations? Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a ignorant literary. It's like, did all those things happen accidentally? The similarity or Marcella, or does it? You know that about yourself and create characters.
That is an excellent question because there is nothing accidental. Not even the most offhand comment in this book isn't meaningful. Everything is meaningful, right? And I don't know if it's just her kind of intuitive genius able to make all those connections. Maybe that's just the way her mind is. She's quite casual in interviews about how, hey, I wrote it. It's my first book. I had no plan. I'm like, lady, wow. There's just like so much to talk about in this book and so many interconnections and nothing seems accidental. So either she's being falsely modest or we do as writers have a sort of, we can go on a kind of creative autopilot where the story takes us over and all of our we are smarter creatively maybe than we are at our conscious level. Maybe like we are remarkably bright creatures, but dumb too, right? So that if we tried to make all these connections, we'd fail. But if we just kind of let ourselves be the species we are and make those connections, maybe it works out. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, bye. Yes.
What I said in Peter Butt. If you did, he did it personally.
No, I read this book through twice, fully twice, quickly first and really slowly the second time. And then I had flagged passages that I'm like, because I'm like, I have to talk about this book. I got to notice things, right? So I had a lot of Post-its in my book, which were upsettingly sticky and actually ripped my pages. So this is a little Tova moment. I'm like, oh, goodness gracious, right? Like, what the heck? These aren't supposed to stick like that. And I actually ripped some pages with my Post-its. I felt really bad about that. Desecrating books.
Yeah. A friend of mine says that her daughter read the book. I didn't like all the rest of the room. Because telegraph every.
Yeah, so that's such a great point. There is a secret in plain sight here, an open secret. We find out very quickly that about Cameron. That's as if that's not the point, right? The point isn't to learn to solve the mystery of the identity. The point is to get the humans to make the connections. Like we have these, it's like tragedy. In Greek tragedy, it's always the hero who's ignorant. Everyone else kind of knows. You're screwed. You're going down. You slept with your mother. You killed your father, whatever. And everyone knows but the hero, right? The hero is like, and so I feel like it's kind of like that,
There's a flaw in the book.
I think it's a decision. I think it's Van Pelt's decision to prioritize the revelation at the level of the character Tova and her understanding of the whole situation, Cameron and so forth. I think it was a decision. But you're right. I noticed that too. I'm like, wow, it's page 70 and I already know what's this like. Well, it's interesting, like, why keep reading? But, this is not that kind of book. That's not that kind of book that we're only reading to find out the answers to the mysteries. So I think it was a decision she made.
It's like this.
Yes. Yeah.
Herself now.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll be thinking about Marcellus for a while.
It was
Yes.
a couple of years ago. I read Soul of an Octopus.
Oh, yes.
And I love Soul Never.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Does it remind you of it?
really
Yeah.
works.
Well, Van Pelt has hit the octopus moment because there's that book, then there was My Octopus Teacher. Did you see that film?
Ah, I love that.
I was diving. I was fortunate to go to the south of France, and I went snorkeling with my daughter, and I was eye to eye with an octopus. They're so well camouflaged, but you know, it was the eyeball. I just saw this big eyeball uncovered in rocks. I'm like, I'm looking at an octopus. I felt it's amazing. Well, we do have to wrap up here. That I really appreciate your attention. You've been such a lovely audience. Go forth with love for everything on Valentine's Day.
Good thing. Yes, and Breen. Yes, I'd like to be set away to the house.